Fascinating. Now, one other thing, though, that I think is really also fascinating is the behavior of the left around Donald Trump. And I love this story because after the Supreme Court rejected attempts to disqualify Trump from the ballot in Colorado, a National Pulse poll has found that 35% of Democrat voters, so a third of them, say that if Trump wins this year's election, they would support Democrats in Congress refusing to certify the election results. Mick, this sounds very kind of, I don't know, almost a little bit insurrection-y to me here.
Yeah.
Who's fighting democracy now?
Yeah, who's undermining democracy is a great question. And this comes back to the first story we talked about with John Kelly, talking about Donald Trump in the same sentence as Hitler. You can't do that. We have to stop doing that in this country. Keep in mind, the Democrats have likened every single Republican candidate for president since Nixon to Hitler in one way or another. Sooner or later, what you get is what you saw in that polling data, which is just a large swath of people saying, you know what, to heck with elections. We don't want to certify him if our person doesn't win. And, why not? If he's Adolf Hitler, maybe they're right about that. So we have to stop doing this. People who lose need to accept the loss. People who win need to do so graciously. Unfortunately, the country is not moving in that direction.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we all remember some of the stuff they tried to do to Mitt Romney, who was about the most white bread bland person, who's ever run for president, but lovely fellow, but nevertheless. Finally, talking about democracies, I want to talk about a democracy overseas, Israel, and the rift between the Biden and Netanyahu governments. And they're at a tipping point here after a U.S. intelligence assessment publicly warned Netanyahu's leadership is in jeopardy. Now, Chuck Schumer has been out speaking against Netanyahu, saying they should basically have another election. This feels a bit like the United States, or some Democrats are starting to poke their noses into Israeli Democrat processes and are a bit more concerned about Netanyahu than they are Hamas. Is this about Michigan? What's this about?
Yeah. By the way, yes, it's exactly about Michigan. In other countries, we would call this, election interference, overseas election interference. But I guess it's okay for us to do it if we don't like what the people in the other country are doing. This was a big deal today. The threat assessment was one thing. The Schumer comments on the Senate floor, which I've watched, were some of the most demeaning statements I've seen in the Senate in a long time. He talked to an elected head of state, one of our close allies, like a small child. And not in a good kind of way. So it's really surprising how quickly the Democrats are starting to flip on Israel. Yes, it comes back to Michigan. They all saw that vote tally during the Michigan primary a couple of weeks back, where more than 100,000 people voted uncommitted in the Democrat primary to send a message to Joe Biden that they did like his policies in Gaza. And Donald Trump won Michigan by less than 40,000 votes back in 2016. So 100,000 is a big deal in Michigan. The answer to your question, James, is yes. This is politics. It's a shame the Democrats don't have any statesmen like they were calling for back when Donald Trump was president.
Mick, it's an absolute mess. Thank you so much for your time, and we will speak to you next week, I am sure.